but they're not twins. One's just at the beginning and the other one's at the end of 11.
That's incredible. So you have 5?
6.
6. Oh.
2 girls, 4 boys. And here's the scary part. 3 grandbabies. So I'm a Gigi.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. Was the 6, was it like, I definitely want to have like 5 to 6 kids, or did it just kind of unfold as your life unfolded?
Oh, are you such an organized person that you go, I'm going to have this one and they're going to come out at that? Nah, that's not me. So the answer to that was no. I was a very young mama. And so when I first began, and then, so I had a couple then, and then I kind of say that I've got 2 generations. So it's the older generation and then the younger generation, although the younger is getting a bit older. So it's kind of scary. Like they're literally, you know, the girls are, one started high school and the one's at the, you know, the other end of primary school. So like they are getting older. And it's exciting. It really is, just to venture on and have kids at all different levels. I think it's what keeps me real and keeps me really grounded, because like you're navigating so many different things. One of the things that's interesting is, and I don't know if you've heard this yet, but I asked my kids, I said, you know, what's kind of like the old days to you? And you know what the answer was? Yesterday is the olden days, Mom.
That's
oh my gosh. How crazy is that?
That is a scary question though. What is the olden days to you? Because I think about
Joel,
that.
What is the olden days to you?
The olden days to me is like when MSN Messenger was the thing, and that was the only thing, and it was enough. it was
That's
enough.
Hilarious. So do you remember CDs and discs and Walkmans? I thought it was really cool when I got my first Walkman.
My buddy just got a Walkman, so I guess it's coming back.
Wow, no way. That's hilarious.
I still do. I mean, we got a record machine that plays CDs, and there's like this record store that has just as many CDs as it does records, and they're like anywhere from like $2 to $6 a CD, depending on like what CD it is. Wow. So, you know, there must be a market, right?
Well, here's the funny thing. And do you think we've kind of, it's like we do these cycles. We start getting into something and then we go, bored of that. There's so much that stimulates us, and we move on to the next thing. And then we go, actually, that was kind of all right. Let's pick that up again. Do you think we kind of like that as humans?
I think we do that with our relationships too, not just our.
Oh my gosh!
Like that's, you know, you have the separation, and maybe you like love and cherish the relationship with your new partner, but you're like, yeah, the other one was all right as well. You know, it's like. But
isn't that why we're going through so many relationships? If you think of it, it's blown me away, honestly, during this whole, when this pandemic hit the horizon, how many relationships haven't stuck through it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we go through relationships because, you know, we try and slay our inner demons via our partner. And we think, you know, we think, okay, well, either this person's going to fix me or I'm going to fix this person, and then that's going to fix me. And we're not dealing with me. And next thing you know, we leave when what could have been, not all the time, but what could have been the answer was to just do some inner work and see what you were mirroring to that person or what they were mirroring back to you. And so that's the relationship side of it. But I think same thing for CDs. It's like, yeah, we want the new shiny object. And then it's like, you know what? That wasn't so bad. My iPhone is almost as big as my Walkman. So it's not like my pockets are any more empty, you know?
I love that. This is so random. But firstly, I want to welcome you to the decision table. We are literally just going to have a conversation here. Who knows where it goes? We have a bit of fun on here, but we also go really deep, and there's no judgment zone on here, so you can say whatever you want to. But one of the things I do is I do use a lens each month. And this month, we've been using the lens of humanity as stakeholders at the decision table. And I think that for me, it's the pinnacle of everything that I teach and train, because I think, what if we went back to when we're making decisions at the table, humanity as stakeholders? What would that change, and what would that look like? If we go back, if we think of that and we talk about relationships, have we just gone, okay, let's move on to the next thing, the next person, because we're not putting humanity as stakeholders?
That's the question for me.
I don't know. I just wondered, actually, when we were talking, that kind of came up in my head.
Yeah, it's a very fair question. I think that humanity is like a bit of a maxim, or like a bit of a thing. It's like if a corporation slaps the word, we're all about humanity, and they give some money to charity, and we all see that, that doesn't actually mean that anything they do is for humanity. And we're so inundated with this word now because there's a lot of great causes. There's a lot of great people doing a lot of great things, and we see a lot of it. And I think the more of it that we kind of get hit with, the less we connect with that word, right? And so now I think like a lot of it is humanity as a way for us to just think that we're doing a good job in the world, think that we're participating in the world, but really, unfortunately, there's still a lot of selfish behavior and action that we have to remove if we actually really, if we're actually thinking about humanity as a stakeholder in this thing, right? What's the maybe the most simplest one if we think about climate change, right?
Yeah.
Deny or not deny, or whatever the case is, if you're gonna, you can't just march in the parade with Greta, Right?
If you do that, does it all change? I thought it did.
Right. And I know that's like super simplistic. I get that. But I think that that's what's happening with a lot of things. I think that's what's happening with the various movements, all important. Black Lives Matter, the movements around, racism against Asians in America, the indigenous cultures. There's so many that I think as human beings, we intrinsically have a tough time really penetrating one when there's 15. And maybe the result is not as significant as if we really just dialed into one. But now I'm way over here. We're talking about.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Actually, what is interesting, and I was just thinking it as you were talking, was, oh my goodness, we went straight in to the deep. Like you're actually the first one that's gone right to that other side, which for you, obviously, when you hear that word humanity, you think of contribution, impact, all that side of it, right? Or not?
Well, yeah, I think I do, but I think more of, yeah.
And by the way, that's not bad. It's just a question.
I think more about, when I hear the word humanity, I think more about what is our shared humanity. And that we can use that as a digression back to the discussion about relationships. What is the shared humanity of our relationships? Well, how deep does that go? So the shared humanity of our relationships, you and I both have children. So our relationships don't just affect us and our partner. Our relationships affect our children. Our relationships affect how our children show up in the world. Our relationships affect potentially our grandchildren, right? That entire line comes through one lifelong, potentially lifelong interaction, right? Of which much of humanity is at stake because we're eating so much beyond ourselves. And so if we, as a couple, find a way to work through our work through our challenges, work through our differences, find ways to build love into our relationship, as opposed to taking the exit, which is again, I always want to stress, sometimes that's the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But many of the times we're just not feeling satisfied. Yeah. And humanity's at stake, right? Not just our own selfish feeling of, I'm not getting what I want in this relationship. So I think about that. I think how everything we do is connected to so much more of humanity that we don't even sometimes see when it goes down generation lines and crosses continents and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing that's come up a lot in the conversations that I've had at the table. And, you know, it's through many of the different lenses that we've used already this year, but is this whole generational thing. And I think, you know, for me personally, every decision that is made is not just impacting this generation, but that is going to be impacting the generations and the generations to come. And if I'm going to be making decisions at the table, I want to know that I'm leaving footsteps behind that the next generations can actually springboard from, right? Not have to dig up and fix and try and find their way. Like, I just feel like we had the privilege of, well, I personally did, of being born into a generation where we had a lot of opportunity. And I wonder if we continue the way we're going, whether we are leaving behind that opportunity and more for the next generations to springboard from. Have you got any insights around that or thoughts?
Yeah, that's really good. And I'm so glad that I never thought of it in the way of footsteps. And I think that's just brilliant. You know, there's a lot of ways to look at that when we talk about what's the opportunity we're leaving behind. There's a financial way of looking at that, right? You know, what's happened, and I'm not totally immersed in this world, but what has happened over the last period of time is as we go through generations, that wealth is supposed to be handed down to the next generation. That opportunity is supposed to be handed down to the next generation. But by and large, what's been happening is that transfer of wealth has not actually been happening. And the gap between the young rich and the old rich is increasing, right? It's not, and it shouldn't be. It should be decreasing, right? The young should be catching up. And so even though we're in this this incredibly fast-paced world of endless opportunity across an endless amount of different sectors and industries, that transfer of wealth isn't happening the way it's supposed to. So that is a concern. There's so much protection over that wealth. And I can give sort of an example that just was shared with me recently about how broken the system is. So the US airline industry is asking for something like a $50 billion bailout, right? Due to the global pandemic, COVID-19. Yeah. Now, one would think, sure, that makes sense. Nobody was flying, right? But what isn't part of that story is that the US airline industry has spent $45 billion buying back shares of their own companies to keep their share price inflated. So they're effectively keeping their share price steady, padding their own bank accounts on taxpayers' dollars that should instead be used towards fueling innovation and opportunity for the youth, right? Transferring that wealth back down. Yeah. So, that's one thing. But I think where we're in the most interesting place in time is, is what is the emotional legacy that we are going to leave, and how free from ourselves are we going to be going into the next generation and the generation after that? Because that's really where I think we've come to as a society. There's no question that that we've created a world in which we're going to have a higher standard of living by and large, from a material standpoint, than, or at least have access to that than previous generations. But take away the Tesla, take away the shoes and whatever else it is that you now have more access to than your grandma's grandma did. What is the emotional impact that we're carrying, and how do we know how to deal with that? And I think that right now what we're seeing is this big opening up And a lot of people are saying a lot of things and learning a lot of things and ingesting a lot of things. Like, this is sort of crazy, but, people talking about woke culture and 5D and really, really kind of the pendulum swinging very, very far in front of maybe what we really are, even if that's where we're heading to. And so I think it's really important for us to help our generations understand what the human condition is from an emotional standpoint so that we can free that from ourselves. And I think that was a very long ramble on that.
It was a great ramble, and I love it. And there were so many things that I want to pull out from it. One of the things is that in a lot of ways, what we were talking about were challenges that are hitting across the globe. We went big in that way and really addressed some of those things. And then you pulled it right back to going, but then does the next generation or the younger generation, our generation and the generations to come, do we have that emotional capacity to be able to take on whatever are the consequences of maybe some of the decisions we've made, right? Come on, let's be real here. And then on the other side of it, it's whatever, like, I think that there's often when there's an awareness of such greatness that maybe the awoken sort of side of it talks about, and that way there becomes more of a responsibility that has to come with that as well. If you are going to be more awoke, that's my belief on it. And have we got that emotional capacity to be able to take on some of that, or to work with that in the best way that's going to be the most effective for humanity going forward?
Yeah, and that and to be an ambassador of an awareness that maybe you've cultivated in your own life, or awokeness, if you will.
It's so random talking like that. Keep going.
is not to be a preacher on Twitter, is not to be a preacher on Instagram and a condemner, because that isn't awareness. That isn't woke. Like, that is something that is inside. And if someone comes to you and they say, hey, this is what's up for me, what are your thoughts about it? I'm inviting that. That's how someone who has cultivated that awareness should be passing that down, not in this general environment that makes a lot of people feel kind of bad. And I don't think the intent is ill by any means.
Just so I understand, so you're meaning that if you think of the tribal side of life, right? The tribes, within tribes, you would learn how to do things, or what that was look like. Are you saying we should be going back into more of the us learning on that scale versus it being released in Twitter, social media of some sort, Facebook, wherever?
I mean, everything's got duality baked into it, and so the fact that there is a lot of that conversation there is good, but there's no context, and it's good in the sense that it brings more awareness to this idea that, we have the capacity as human beings to free ourselves from our own suffering, our own
absolutely
wounds. Yep. But when it happens without the context, it often feels like shaming. It often feels like guilt.
Tell me more about that. I think we need to unpack that more. What do you mean by that?
What do I mean by the shaming piece and the guilt piece?
The capacity, the capacity to unpack that, I guess, with the shame in the side of it, right?
Well, it's so easy because, if we, unless we are free of comparing ourselves to others, right?
Right.
If we have somehow found it in ourselves to not look at somebody else's success or way of life or whatever, from the lens of comparison. Then if I see you on Instagram or wherever, living your best life, as they say,
right?
Living your life your way, preaching your wisdom.
That's right. Yeah.
a lot of people that I do work with, that doesn't make them feel better. That makes them feel, why can't I cultivate that? Why don't I have that? And it has this opposite effect where it shows them exactly what they don't like about themselves. It shows them exactly what they don't think they have in their own life. And so
I'm trying to understand. So then, should I not be doing that because I'm now making other people feel? Or are we meant to be, as humans, getting to a point where we're not even having to deal with comparison? That's what I'm trying to understand on this.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. And I think that the answer lies in you are and should do whatever it is that you want to do.
Right.
And those that aren't ready to hear that shouldn't listen to it. They shouldn't go there, right? They should take their own steps.
Interesting.
At their own pace to get there. And the challenge is that it's hard to control those steps because we're so inundated. We're so overwhelmed with that constant stream of how to improve ourselves, and it has a negative effect, right? Because when we go and approach something from that lens, it implies automatically that something is wrong. Now, something with us. Now, something might be, we might.
So when we go to the lens of using comparison, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. When we go to the lens of,
I'm just being, the reason I'm questioning all of this is I think that often, and something that I'm finding out even more so using humanity as stakeholders, and it's just been so strong, and that is that the way we communicate, the way you're saying something, I want to really understand from what you're saying so that I can then go, haha, or no, I really think this, or nah, not even going there. Because I think we often miss, just keeping it real, we often miss what you're actually saying because it's not the way I would think about it.
Right. It's one of those things where, if for anyone who's listening, anything that I'm sharing my own feelings towards. I'm sharing my own experience of it, right? Clearly, I struggle with that. And so
tell me, where does that come from?
Right. Well, if we go back to, our childhoods, and we go back to this idea of like, how did we shape this sense of self that we have? Right.
Let's go there.
Well, you can uncover pretty quick that not much of what you think actually came from you. You think it did. Your mind thinks it did. But really, it came from your parents, and it came from your friends. It came from your teachers, and it came from the media, and it came from the news, and it came from your favorite magazine, and it came from your favorite TV show. And so all your young life, you've been inundated with these concepts that create the lens in which you see the world. That lens could mean, I believe I could be anything. That lens could be, I believe I'm nothing. That lens could be, money is important. That lens could be, money's not important. That lens could be, my love life needs to be this certain way. My love life needs to be that certain way, right? And so we have this concept body, right, that we're carrying with us into our adulthood. But all of a sudden in our adulthood, we're faced with it in an entirely different way. As a child, we're under the protection of our parents. We're not independent. And so we don't know, right? We don't have this.
Well, you're saying so many things that I just want to push in there, because firstly, before we move into the adulthood, let's go back to that childhood. Like, I've never heard it quite in that way, because here's the thing. If we are under parenthood of our decisions and who we are, then you're saying it is because of our environment, our parents, our growing up of whatever that was, that we were stepping into who we were next. Am I right in understanding that from what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not saying we don't have our own personality or we don't have our own individuality inside of it. But what I'm saying is put around all that.
That's where I would have a little bit to say about that one. But first, before I do say something about that, tell me, why have you come up with this?
Why have I come up with this?
Come from? As in you, not we, but you. What was that like for you as a kid?
So I was a really talented long distance runner as a child.
Wow.
And as a teenager. And I represented Canada internationally, and I had a full ride scholarship. And my whole life was centered around running, and my approval system from my parents, from my network, centered around running. And then in my freshman year of college, right after qualifying for the Worlds, I ruptured my Achilles.
Ouch.
And
in more ways than one.
Right. And I was not able to do the one thing that made me feel important, that made me feel like I was seen as a human being, right? And so over the course of the next decade, starting numerous successful businesses, I operated from the standpoint of filling the void of running with successful businesses. You know, I raised millions of dollars, took a company onto the NASDAQ. But I didn't know it, but I was desperate to be seen. I was just desperate to have something. And then by the end of it, when I'd sold my company to an Australian, I had an underwear company called Naked, hence the Getting Naked piece there, and the book. I was depressed, and I was anxious. I was anxiety ridden. And I had a death. And one of my dear friends passed away, who was young like me, had young children. And it was the first time I'd asked myself why I was doing anything, why I was doing anything. Why was I a runner? When, if I looked back at it, I had maybe enjoyed the running, but I didn't enjoy the pressure and the competition and the stakes to always be the best. And I was robbed. And this isn't a poor me story. So many people have a similar version of this story in some way, whether that's academics, whether that's hockey, whether that's whatever. And all of a sudden, you know, you're torn open, and you ask yourself the question, wait a second, why did all this come into be? Where did I develop this belief system that success had to be this way and I had to be this way? And so that's where the work led to this idea of this understanding, I should say, of these concepts, and that underneath it all, maybe I still wanted to be in business as an entrepreneur, but it didn't have to be in the same way that I was doing it before. It didn't have to be, you know, I was almost divorced. I hadn't seen my daughter in practically 2 years because I was traveling 250 days a year on the road.
Cool.
You know, that's not healthy. And it's okay. It's a wonderful, beautiful thing to work hard and follow your purpose and create your life. I'm not saying it's not. But you have to understand, what is the cost of that creation? What are you sacrificing? And why are you doing it? What is your motivation intrinsic? And so that's...
See, I think those are absolutely powerful questions, by the way.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's, you know, I guess I kind of rambled on before, and that's where a lot of this comes from, is that journey of my own self to say, hey, now I'm here with you.
Yeah.
But I'm not here the same as I was as a 27-year-old.
And I get that, and I want to just acknowledge the fact that you shared such a beautiful vulnerability of your story, and I want you to be able to share that, because in a lot of ways, that's where that truth for you comes out of. I think it's interesting because then we make it a truth for everyone. And I wonder, and maybe it is a truth for everyone. I'm not saying no, it's not. I'm literally questioning it. And I think that the other piece of this is, and something from my side of the work has been this, I call it the secretive advantage, which is if you're able to actually exercise the muscle of human intelligence. And for me, human intelligence is the data in which we have within us that we then have as an output. And sometimes that data comes into us from environments. Sometimes it's in our DNA from, genetically. Sometimes it's experiences. Sometimes it's emotion. There's so many different triggers that give us data within our bodies. Mm-hmm. Physical, emotional, spiritual, you name it, it's there. It builds our DNA. So that's why I questioned what you said, because I would question whether it has just been a moment in that time where the parents have been the one that put that data into me, because I know, or that I come from a position of, now I'm out from that, I'm growing into adulthood. Because I think what the risk of something like this is, and when we say things like this as a truth, as a general truth of everything, what's the word I'm trying to think of? It's in the tip of my head somewhere, way back down there somewhere. But when we say
human intelligence to get it out.
Yeah, that's what happens when you've been on 4 days of events. But I mean, reality is, right, when we have all this intelligence within us, I think if we step and we go, because of this, I then became that, then the ownership gets removed from me. And I think there's a huge risk when we don't own who we are right now, whether that's good, bad, or ugly. But if we don't own that, or we don't own, so I'm not saying that you were to own all those things, but what I would be saying is, what did you own during that time?
Yeah.
And what are you doing with that? Now that you know that, how are you going to leave some of that behind and some of that take forward, because you know it works for you?
That's beautiful. And by the way, I totally agree. If I didn't say it properly, I did believe that some of those experiences become so heavy that they
do
cover up a lot. One of the big
ones.
And
I totally agree, by the way. I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the big ones is sexual abuse, and how many people define so much of their life based on something that we talk about ownership, and nothing to do with them, although they still have to own that it happened, and that it doesn't have anything to do with them, their worth, their sexuality, any of that, right? And so I think that.
So why did you bring that one up then?
Just because it's something that it's not actually. I would tell you if it's something that happened to me. It's not, but it's so many people.
But is it something that when you see working with clients through this whole lens of comparison, is it something that you've seen a lot of?
I see it a lot in SelfWorth-ish, where so what's under, right?
Right.
So there's this idea that I have trouble with self-worth. So what does that manifest as? That manifests in I am overly kind and generous to the point of sacrificing my own health and wellness, or I do nonstop charity work. And again, charity work's a beautiful thing, but I don't have an off button there, or I need to make all the money in the world to feel, or I need to be seen on TV, et cetera, et cetera. So many of those outputs underneath, it comes down to self-worth. And often for me, self-worth came from feeling like achievement was the only thing that made me worthy. But I have seen with clients I've worked with, I can't even count how many times, where the sexual abuse became the vehicle that created this lack of self-worth and this need to fill it in other things that they were doing. And owning it is so complicated, right?
I know, but it's not impossible. And the reason I say that is because I'm fascinated with patterns. That's my work is all based on patterns. And I go, what if we could wire to a different pattern, get a different behavior, and then actually get the result we want? What would that need to look like? And that's why I asked that question, because I would absolutely put a lot of money on it that a lot of them had been sexually abused. Here's the crazy thing. I also know that because you've been sexually abused, I've got a massive story. Who you see in front of you is not who you would have expected when you saw that young girl that I was growing up. Like, it is the opposite worlds. And in past decision tables, I've talked about it with different people and gone into different situations because I've got nothing to hide in that way. But I had to disrupt a lot of patterns. And I took ownership of those patterns, going, hey, I can't stop what has happened in the past. I can't change all the families that I went in and out of as a young girl growing up. I can't change the fact that I had so many people say to me, Kiri Marie, you are never going to amount to anything. And I can't change any of those things. What I can change is what I decide today.
Mm-hmm. And every day, yeah.
And every day going forward, right? But here's the thing. My drivers have to be stronger, that I want that change, rather than going back to what I call your default decision DNA.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so great. And it's the thing that I've come to understand as awareness being where the ownership comes into place, right? So when we're able to, if we talk about, you can take a spiritual path to this, you could take a practical path, you can take a Western psychology path. There's so many paths to this one idea of awareness, and that's separating ourselves from those patterns, separating ourselves just enough that we can see it's a pattern, just enough that we can see, hey, I see where that dot connected. And to your point, I can't change what happened then. Mm-hmm. And in all honesty, one of the things that's so challenging about, again, it's 100% possible, is that what happened then is not the story we necessarily carry with us today. It's the memory of the story, which has over time shifted and shaped just little bits of ways that make it harder and harder. Like, it's like it attaches more and more. And when, to your point, when we see it, and the problem and the challenge with healing, which is why I always say healing's on a continuum. It's not on an ayahuasca journey, or it's not on a, whatever.
Oh, you mean you just don't fix it like this?
Right? It's because that pattern's going to show up. One of my friends always said, it takes as long to wade out of the water as it did to wade in. Sometimes, I think it depends how fast you can disrupt and how willing you are and how desperate you want it. I really do. So I always say there's many people who can't work with me, like literally. And I wouldn't make you work with me, right? Because that wouldn't be fair. And I always say, but I know lots of people who you could work with. Yeah.
But if you're really willing to play big, to disrupt the patterns, and I don't care what your story, I call it your old story is, let's make your new one. And let's because here's the thing that a lot of people don't do. They go, okay, let's deal with this. Let's heal this. Great. But they don't rewire to a new pattern. Mm-hmm. And guess what? When we're not rewired to a new pattern, we go straight back to what we know. Because there's nothing else to wire to. And that's where we are directed to. Yeah. So we have to then go, okay, now we know what the pattern is. Now we know we need to disrupt it. What are we going to rewire it to?
Yeah.
And we have to change that. So that's where it doesn't matter what your old story is. You can change it to a new story, but you've got to disrupt it and you've got to rewire to a new pattern.
Yeah. Integration.
Absolutely. And then here's the thing. Remember how I talked about the muscle of human intelligence? Any muscle, if you're into fitness, I mean, you're a runner, you know that you've got to work that muscle. You've got to keep doing your training. You've got to keep looking after it. You've got to have recovery. Mm-hmm. This is no different. Mm-hmm. Just because we've rewired to something, we've got to make sure that that is working and in place and exercise it and keep moving it.
Yeah.
And yet often we hope that special pill will give us that opportunity to bring the change that we want.
It's that is so beautifully said. You know, no matter how good you are as a runner or in any sport, there's always a new challenger. There's always a new thing that you have to just tweak to prepare for. You know, that being the tie into your metaphor of wiring a new story. And so life just keeps coming at you. And sometimes even if you have wired that new story and you have integrated it, there's something that just comes out of left field and you got to really work to keep on that new story, you know.
Yes. And that it's a journey. And here's the other piece. And something that has been really interesting, and I continue, like the first thing that I talk about usually is the need for a new approach to leadership. And I'm writing a white paper around it right now. And one of the things that I say is that, you know, we've got the old way we used to do things, but we've got to think of how do we want the new way? See, everyone complains about how it's not working, but where's the solutions? How are we going to even come up with those solutions? And here's the thing. We are on a journey. I call it a leadership journey, right? And the thing is, what was old school was we used to get told, these are the 3 principles. If you do this, you'll be a great leader. My thing is, what if we use different lenses and we start asking questions and we start having a new conversation and creating an awareness, and then we take ownership from that to what is needed in what we think and where we need to go? Would that change what's happening?
Probably.
Maybe, right?
Well, absolutely. I always say that just in, you know, I had this film screening recently for a project I was working on, and it's an open forum. Criticism is welcome. That's the point. But all I got back was criticism, and I said, "Wow, where's the solution on the other side of it? The criticism's fine." So I think that's to your point. Is there's not. We need to make sure that we are coming up with the solution on the other side of the problem. Social media.
But here's the thing, what I'm also saying is that we don't just need to come up with the solution. I believe we need to keep evolving. And evolving means, to go back to some of the things that you've said, is that we might compare, or we might go back to some of the default systems, or we might have to work a little harder because we're not used to exercising that muscle in that way. Mm-hmm. And so maybe, just maybe, we have to be better people at being able to evolve and to fail or in front of people, or to not get it all right in front of people, or and if we did that and that was our new norm, would even the lens of comparison have to be there?
Yeah. I lost what you said at the very end there. Didn't come through.
So if you think of all of these things, and we go and we have the freedom, the space, that as a humanity where we could fail, we could, because this is all part of evolving. If we can fail out loud, if we can fail and understand and hear where everyone is, maybe we're not, you know, if you think of all the mental health, you talked about depression. Some of us aren't all feeling happy every single day, every single hour. If we were able to do that in a more open space, if we were able to go, hey, our relationships aren't we're really struggling because I'm working really hard and I need to get these deadlines done, but I also have to be a husband or a partner or a mom or a dad or whatever it is, right? There's comparison in that. And I said, if we were able to do that and be absolutely okay that we are evolving, because evolving means that we don't have it all right and 100% perfect, right? Because we're learning, we're evolving, it develops. Would we even then, if that was the case, would we even have to have the lens of comparison?
No, we would free ourselves of that. Talking about human evolution, I guess that's where we're trying to go, right? Because some of these key
I'd like to believe so.
Right, exactly.
But I think, again, it goes back to us owning that.
Yeah. Yeah, and being okay with it, being okay with, like, all in order to remove comparison, the first step is to just acknowledge that you're comparing.
Yeah.
Because we do it without knowing we're doing it, and then we start to feed the bag of feeling like terrible about ourselves. But if we can have the awareness and the ownership of saying, hey, I'm comparing, even if I'm still comparing, at least I've taken a kernel of it out. And like one time I was asked this question, what's the one thing I wish for humanity? And I said, I wish we'd all be a little gentler on each other. And that, because if we were a little bit gentler on each other, we'd give each other just enough space or we'd hold enough space for each other where we'd have that moment. Now, of course, we do have to achieve that in ourselves, but that idea of, like,
say that more. Go back to that. So if we gave each humanity a little bit more of gentleness, right? Then we would hold the space or the moment. What were you meaning then with that? I want to know more of that.
Well, I tend to look at so much of what we do with each other as mirrors, right? We're just kind of projecting back onto each other what we're dealing with. And this is one of the things that I found with meditation is that, I've certainly never seen any angels or spirit guides or anything literally in my meditation, but I have seen the space, just enough space from my thoughts to not react to them. And so if we taking that same space, let's say you and I were having we were both heavily emotional we had bad days.
Yep.
And we've come home.
I never have one of those days.
No bad days, hashtag, right?
Yeah, right. Whatever.
And anyway, something in triggers me, something triggers you.
Yeah.
And we end up throwing a bit of shade at each other, or we end up, speaking nasty to each other instead of being gentle to the fact that we both had bad days.
Yeah.
And so I go to, like, if we were able to in that moment just hold enough space so that you could decompress what was going on for you and I could decompress what was going on for me, make it real, not make it just in our bodies and in our minds, dissipate that energy by verbalizing it or just even hugging it out. All of a sudden we have saved ourselves a conflict, right? We've saved ourselves pain. We've saved ourselves some trauma. And then we extrapolate that into going into the street, going into when we lose it on our employee or we lose it on our boss or we lose it on the person on the street or we're not patient with them. And then they react because we weren't patient with them. So then they carry that impatience and they carry
domino effect.
It dominoes. And so I just, my whole view is just all these things like comparison and things that are often byproducts of just feeling a bit low and not being able to just take what you're feeling and kind of let it pass before you have to react. hence firing out a Twitter message, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Negative. I think if we just were a little gentler with each other, just a little bit, just 20%, 10% gentler, we would see a lot of those things lessen. If we were gentler on somebody because they had anxiety, if we were gentler on somebody because they were dealing with depression.
Yeah.
And it seems pretty simple, but it's not.
Yeah, I agree. And here's the thing that I think of that. I think when you're able to do that, we go back to our humanity side.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we are allowed to turn up as a whole. Yeah. And we turn up as a human, not as Joel professional or Joel personal. It's Joel, here I am. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when we come back to humanity as stakeholders.
Yeah, I think is that a mic drop moment? Did you just drop the mic?
Hashtag mic drop.
I felt like that was pretty good, but I mean...
Okay, there you go. So by the way, so I'm gonna totally switch that for a second.
Sure.
It is one of those mic drops. I think that's what I love about this conversation. It really, there's been so many today, so many droplets of wisdom. And, for those that maybe will find it hard keeping up, hopefully they've pulled maybe even just one thing out. And I know a lot of people listen to this on the replay. And I hope that in that way, it's like today we have been evolving in our conversation. We took it right from the start and we talked about relationships, and then we just went down all these different rabbit holes or pathways or thinking. And I think it was really important to press in on why you thought around and what your thinking was around comparison, because that was a story that obviously was huge as you shared your, in your younger days. But it doesn't necessarily need to be the story going forward. And we kind of went on that journey. If people want to go on a journey more with you and learn more about you, where do they do that?
They can,
I love that cheeky grin.
It's nice you gave me the floor. No, I have a book called Getting Naked, and it just came out. It's on Amazon right now. Will be on other platforms soon, but it's the story of how to start a business from inception to sale, which follows my company Naked Underwear. But it also is the story of getting back to yourself through your journey and using entrepreneurship as a vehicle to test out those old triggers and rebuild new ones, right? Using it as a window of self-discovery. And so Getting Naked, the bare necessities of entrepreneurship and startups. And then you can just find me at joelprimus.com where I blog and do whatever I do.
No, I love that. And I'm going to look forward to reading that book. I'm a book fanatic. I love reading. And I read so many different books to get different perspectives, because I just go, it's such a great way for us to develop without having to go through all those experiences because someone else has gone through it, right? So it's got to this time of the conversation where we're almost finishing up, but this is the one time I ask the same question on every decision table. And that is, and it kind of, it's so funny because we always talk about it, which is that these conversations, for change to happen, I believe we need to create awareness. And that awareness comes from a conversation. And, we could have had this conversation in private and only us would have gained from that. And I hope that others will gain from it because we've done it in an open forum and realize that, often it doesn't even matter if you don't agree. It just matters that you're having a conversation and you get out of that whatever that is that you need. And then again, from awareness, then take ownership. So my question is this. What are you taking from our conversation today?
Oh, good question. It's been an interesting conversation for me because sometimes I'm exploring these ideas as I'm sharing them. And I definitely should preface that. And it was so great to have you help me check in on, wait a second, because I don't have all the right answers, but in my own journey, I can still get stuck in thinking I've found my own ways of looking at things that are healthy for me, etc. And so I thought that was just awesome, to just wait a second, take a step back, and to do that in a live recorded session is even more sort of exhilarating, And one thing that I hadn't framed in the same way you had, because I had always framed the lessons learned in your healing process and sort of creating a new story for yourself as integration. But I much preferred the way that you phrased it, as simply just, correct me if I get it wrong, but you said just essentially creating the new patterns or the new story for yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I love that.
To rewire to a new pattern.
That was it. To rewire to a new pattern. That was big for me. Right? Because as soon as you said that, I saw numerous blind spots where I haven't rewired to a new pattern, even if I'm incredibly self-aware about what might be happening in the old pattern. So that was...
I love that. That's beautiful. And I love the fact that, this is what I mean by evolving, right? And I think that if we are willing to have these conversations, things like comparison will have no power. Yeah. And things like rewiring gives us a chance to change the story and to bring the change that we are wanting and needing to. And if we go back to our original, right at the start conversation, that those footprints, right, for the generations to come, they are looking much better footprints.
Yeah.
Right? So for that reason, I love it. Wait on, before you say anything, I'll give you a chance again in a minute. But I want to say, what have I taken from this conversation? Because, the thing that I took was the space. What if we gave space for gentleness? Like that side of it. For me, that was just like, whew, what would that create? And how would I do it? That's what I actually went to when I thought of it. I was like, what if humans were, gave permission to be more gentle? And I was like, what would that need to show up if I was doing that in the workplace? What would that need to show up as me as a mom? What would that need to? And I started diving into that, but because we moved on into many different things, of course, I didn't really flesh that out of my brain, but I'm really curious to find how I could be, as a human, more gentle and create more gentleness. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And if you were to leave, or I just want to give you the space, because I always want to do this at the end as well. And that is just, if there's something you haven't been able to say, if there's something you feel that you need to be saying, is there, what is that?
I just like to remind people how, anyone who's listening to this is obviously just filled with courage, because they wouldn't be here if they weren't trying to evolve, as you said. They weren't trying to wire new patterns and tell themselves an improved story from the one that they have been telling themselves. And I think that's the one thing that we forget so often, is that we are so strong and so courageous for showing up, even if we're showing up and we have anxiety, even if we're showing up and we're feeling a bit depressed or fully depressed. That is courageous. And I always just want people to remember how courageous they are for showing up in their lives and doing this work, even if they haven't got the result that they thought they'd have by now in this moment in time. It's there waiting for you.
I love that. Well, Joel, I'm going to end this broadcast, but I want to say thank you to you for having the courage to come to this table, be here with me, and not know what's going to be thrown at you or where we're going to go with this conversation, but you showed up anyway. And I think that's brilliant and amazing.
Thank you. I'm really grateful.
So thank you.